The Enfield Monster. It was a rain-soaked evening in April 1973, when the quiet farming town of Enfield, Illinois, lost its innocence. The kind of town where everyone knew each other's name, where the loudest sound was often the rustle of cornfields under a soft breeze. But that night, the air was heavy, not just with storm clouds, but with something else, something watching. Henry McDaniel, a modest man living with his wife and two children in a small one-story home on McDaniel Street, had just returned from a trip to the store. As he parked his car, he noticed the screen door swinging slightly in the wind. A small annoyance, he thought, but as he stepped inside, his children rushed to him, their eyes wide with panic. Something tried to get in, they said. Something that had scratched and clawed at the door, like an animal. Henry, practical and skeptical, fetched his flashlight and revolver. He stepped outside again, scanning the bushes around the porch with narrowed eyes. That's when he saw it. Standing between two rose bushes about 20 feet away was a creature unlike anything he had ever known. It stood on 3 legs. Yes, 3. And its skin was a sickly gray. The most terrifying detail, though, were its eyes. 2 large, pink glowing eyes that didn't blink. Henry's breath hitched. The creature was 4 to 5 feet tall, with short arms that ended in small twisted claws. It had a lurching, uneven gait, its middle leg dragging slightly behind the others. When the flashlight beam caught it fully, the creature hissed, emitting a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. Henry, driven by instinct, fired 4 shots. He was certain he hit it, but the creature turned and bounded away into the shadows, covering a distance of nearly 75 feet. In just a few hops, it vanished into the night, leaving behind claw marks on the door and the stench of sulfur in the air. Police arrived within the hour. Henry recounted his story calmly, not with the flair of someone seeking attention, but with the nerves of a man who wished he'd imagined the whole thing. The authorities investigated, found the door's damage, saw the prints, odd, 6-toed impressions that didn't match any local animal. They humored Henry, but skepticism was thick in the room. That skepticism began to waver when other townsfolk came forward. A young boy, Greg Garrett, who lived nearby, said he'd been playing in his yard just minutes before Henry's sighting, and claimed the same thing had approached him, only to stomp on his shoes, tearing them. His mother thought it was a prank, but then came more reports, uneasy whispers around town. People claimed to hear shrieking in the night, strange thumping sounds on rooftops, shadows that darted just out of view. But no sighting was ever as vivid as Henry's. He insisted on the details, never wavering. The creature's eyes haunted him. It wasn't an animal, he'd say. It was something else. Word spread beyond Enfield. Monster hunters, cryptozoologists, and curious thrill seekers began arriving, camping near the woods and cornfields. Some claimed they heard movement in the dark. Some swore they caught fleeting glimpses. But just like that, the creature stopped appearing. Days turned to weeks, and the excitement faded. Yet Henry McDaniel never changed his story. Not once. He didn't want fame. He just wanted people to believe what he knew he saw. In interviews, he looked tired, worn, not by age, but by the weight of memory. He would stare out into the woods at night, as though expecting it to return, and whisper, "It wasn't done with us." The town of Enfield would never be the same. Children were kept indoors. Doors were double locked. The story of the Enfield monster became local folklore, something told at campfires and whispered between neighbors when the wind howled a little too loud. But for Henry, it was no story. It was the moment the world shifted, when he realized that beneath the surface of normalcy, There are things that don't fit, things that shouldn't exist, and they're watching. Years passed, but the fear never quite left Enfield. The creature was never found. No carcass, no droppings, no nest, not even a reliable trail. Scientists dismissed the case as hysteria. They said it was likely a misidentified kangaroo, an escaped exotic pet. But how could a kangaroo move like that? Or have 3 legs? Or eyes that glowed with intelligence and malevolence? Henry McDaniel rejected those explanations firmly. "I know what I saw," he repeated over the years, even as his voice grew weak and his hands trembled with age. His children, now grown, avoided the topic. Some moved away entirely, others stayed, watching the woods with the same guarded suspicion as their father once did. For those who believed, the infield monster was more than a local legend. It was a glimpse into a veil most people never see behind. There were rumors of government trucks in the area weeks after the sightings, of researchers in suits asking questions. One man claimed to have been threatened to keep quiet, but like all such stories, they faded into conspiracy and hearsay, yet the silence spoke volumes. Henry believed it was still out there, maybe not near Enfield, maybe not even in Illinois, but somewhere, lurking, watching, waiting. He was convinced it wasn't an isolated creature. He believed it was a scout, or worse, a predator, testing the boundaries of a new hunting ground. On his last night, Henry sat in his recliner by the window, staring out into the field. As the wind rustled the tall grass, there was a look in his eyes, a flicker of fear and acceptance. He had spent his life as the man who saw what shouldn't be seen. He never profited from it, never wanted attention, but he died with one final message. It's real, it's still real, and you should be afraid. The police found his note a day later, clutched in his hand. It was written shakily, barely legible, but the intent was clear. He had never let it go. The monster hadn't just haunted his past, it had nested in his mind, just as it had burrowed into the shadowed cracks of Enfield's history. To this day, travelers passing through Enfield sometimes report strange lights in the woods, or the sound of something heavy leaping across roads in the middle of the night. Most shrug it off, but those who remember Henry McDaniel and the terror of 1973 do not. They keep their windows locked. They teach their children not to wander too far, because in a quiet town tucked between farmland and forest, a monster once knocked on a door, and it might knock again. The Suicide Hotel, Hotel del Salto, perched on the edge of a cliff, shrouded in fog, and overlooking the roaring Tequendama Falls. The Hotel del Salto was once a marvel of elegance and escape. Built in 1923 in the Colombian mountains, it stood like a castle lost in time, its French Gothic architecture defiant against nature's decay. Tourists once sipped cocktails on its balconies, admiring the misty cascade as birds circled the gorge below. But the whispers always lingered. Locals believed the falls were cursed, that the spirits of those who leapt to their deaths from the cliffs never truly left. Over the years, the hotel's luxury faded, and its reputation blackened. By the 1990s, it had shuttered its doors. Mold crept across its walls, vines coiled through shattered windows, and silence swallowed its once bustling halls. But silence in a place like this is never empty. It is waiting. It was 2014 when a small group of paranormal investigators, lured by legends, decided to document a night inside the abandoned Hotel del Salto. Among them was Andres Guerrero, a skeptic turned believer who had spent years chasing stories but never truth. That night, the air felt too thick, the quiet too deliberate. As dusk swallowed the last light, the team set up their cameras in the grand dining hall, its chandelier, long fallen, its marble floor cracked like bones. Andres wandered alone, drawn toward the upper floors where rooms were left frozen in time. Dust-coated beds, shattered mirrors, and a strange scent of damp roses clung to the corridors. He paused before room 217. The number had been circled in red on a floor plan they'd found earlier. No explanation, no note, just a mark. Inside, the air turned cold, suffocating. The walls were smeared with faint handprints, not paint, not dirt, something else. Andres turned on his recorder, whispering into the mic, but the static crackled back at him, growing louder until it sounded like breathing. And then he saw her, standing by the window, a woman in a tattered white dress, her hair matted, her back turned. Before he could speak, she jumped. Andres rushed forward, only to find the window sealed shut, bolted from the inside. The team found him an hour later, collapsed on the floor, pale and trembling, in his hand, a note not his own. She never left. The handwriting was not Andres's. The ink was fresh. The footage they recovered was corrupted. All but one clip. It showed Andres entering the room. And then, nothing. 30 seconds of black. But in the final frame, just as the video cut, a face emerged behind him, unnaturally close, eyes wide, mouth agape, in an eternal scream. Andres never returned to paranormal work. He moved cities, changed numbers, and refused to speak of that night. But his colleagues noticed a change. He never looked anyone in the eye. He jumped at shadows, once a loud, confident man. He barely whispered when he spoke. In the background of one photo from his final public appearance, near a mirrored elevator door, a reflection appears that doesn't belong to anyone in the frame. The Hotel del Salto has since been transformed into a museum, but some rooms remain locked. Staff say it's for renovations. Locals know better. They hear the screams late at night, echoing down the valley. Some visitors claim they've seen a woman on the edge of the balcony, her dress fluttering like wings, before she vanishes. Tour guides avoid talking about the suicides, but the falls remain, eternally falling, like the souls that leapt, and the hotel, once a monument to escape, now stands as a monument to the lost. For in the walls of the suicide hotel, time doesn't pass, it repeats, and some spirits, they don't check out. Years later, a woman named Camila, a historian researching haunted sites in South America, visited the museum that now occupied the shell of Hotel del Salto. Her goal was simple: documentation, not belief. But the building had other plans. During her private tour, she insisted on seeing room 217, same room Andres had entered a decade earlier. The guide hesitated, said the key was missing. Camila didn't believe him. That night, she slipped through a service hallway and found its door ajar, as if waiting. She entered. The air shifted immediately. It wasn't cold, but heavy, like she had walked underwater. The room had no bed, no furniture, just the peeling wallpaper and the cracked window that stared into the black void beyond the cliff. As she stood there scribbling notes into a journal, she felt the floor shift behind her, a low creak. She turned. No one. Then the mirror on the wall rippled, not shattered, not broken, but as though something moved just beneath the surface, and from it, a voice, a whisper that wasn't spoken aloud, but filled the space between thoughts. Jump. Camila dropped her journal. Her heart thundered. Her hands trembled. The reflection twisted, showing not her own face, but another's, pale and hollow-eyed. She fled the room, her screams swallowed by the empty halls. When museum staff found her in the lobby, hours later, she was incoherent, muttering a single phrase over and over. She's still falling. She never stops falling. The museum hushed the incident, claimed it was a medical episode, but the footage from the hallway showed Camila walking into a room that no one had the key for. Security logs didn't show the door ever opening. A journal was never found, but a single torn page surfaced in a nearby ravine. Days later, soaked but legible, it read, "If you hear her calling, don't answer. If you see her face, it's already too late." Locals say the woman in white was a bride who leapt on her wedding night. Others believe she's older than the hotel itself, a spirit bound to the falls, feeding on grief. Whatever the truth, one thing remains constant. Those who see her, who truly see her, leave changed, or don't leave at all. To this day, room 217 remains sealed. Some say it doesn't always appear, that it vanishes, then returns, luring in the curious and the damned. The museum denies this. They speak of restoration and heritage, but in quiet moments, even the most skeptical staff walk a little faster past the upper corridors, and at night, when the wind howls through the valley and the waterfall's roar drowns all else, the faintest voice can sometimes be heard on the balcony, soft, sorrowful, and unending. A whisper that calls across time and space. Jump. The Villisca Axe Murder House. In the small, unassuming town of Villisca, Iowa, nestled among rows of quiet homes and overgrown hedges, stands a white two-story house with a history stained in blood. To passers-by, it looks like any other early 20th century farmhouse, its wooden exterior flaking with time, its porch sagging slightly at the corners, but behind its doors is a silence that presses against the soul, a silence that remembers. On the night of June 10th, 1912, something unspeakable happened here. Josiah and Sarah Moore, along with their 4 children and 2 young overnight guests, were bludgeoned to death with an axe. The killer, never caught, left no clear motive, only the marks of a slaughter, mirror-covered windows, a blood-drenched ceiling, and 8 lives erased while they slept. The crime scene baffled investigators. Every mirror had been shrouded, every victim struck in their sleep, some beyond recognition. The axe, belonging to Josiah Moore himself, was found abandoned in the guest room, coated with blood and hair. No one heard a scream. No one saw a shadow flee into the night. The town reeled, not just from grief, but from the realization that someone could kill with such merciless precision and vanish without a trace. Over the decades, the house was passed from owner to owner, most of whom stayed only briefly. Whispers of moving furniture, sudden chills, and children's laughter at midnight drove many away. The Moore House, as it came to be known, became a reluctant legend. By the 2000s, the house had been restored to its 1912 condition, turned into a historical site by day and a paranormal destination by night. Brave or foolish, souls paid to spend the night inside, hoping to catch a glimpse of something otherworldly. In 2014, one such visitor named Robert Lawson joined a small investigative group to document any ghostly phenomena. He arrived armed with cameras, recorders, EMF detectors, the works. But it was never about the ghosts for Robert. He wanted to confront darkness. He wanted to feel what the victims felt. What he didn't expect was how quickly the house turned on him. By 2 a.m., the group's equipment began failing. Static overtook audio. Lights flickered. Doors creaked open on their own. Then came the voice. A child's whisper. "Why did you let us die?" It came from the empty hallway near the parents' bedroom. Robert, who had been in the kitchen reviewing footage, froze. He walked toward the sound, his camera shaking. The hallway temperature dropped. His breath puffed in the air. In the footage, you can hear him mutter, "This isn't a game." Moments later, he cried out. The camera captured only chaos, blurs of motion, a thud, the sound of someone collapsing. The group found Robert on the floor near the upstairs bedroom, clutching a knife, one he had brought only for protection. He had stabbed himself in the chest. He survived, barely, but gave no explanation. When questioned later, he simply said, "The house told me to." His voice was hollow, his eyes distant. Robert never returned to Villisca. He vanished from the public eye, reportedly moved out of state, but others who visited after him claimed the energy in the house changed. The air became heavier, more oppressive. Investigators noted increased activity, lights that darted across walls, disembodied footsteps, and once a child's giggle that echoed long after the group had gone silent. The Moore house had always been haunted, they said, but something had awakened, something darker, and with every visitor who dared to spend the night, the walls seemed to grow hungrier. Some say the Moore children never left, that their spirits still linger in the corners where they once played, confused and terrified. Visitors report toys moving on their own, tiny footprints appearing in the dust, and soft whimpering near the attic door. But there is something else now, something not childlike. After Robert's incident, mediums and sensitives began reporting a shadow figure that looms near the kitchen, its presence angry, possessive. One psychic described it as not of this world, something born of violence. Some believe the act of self-harm reopened a door long sealed shut, reactivating the darkness that once moved through those rooms unseen. Others insist that the killer, whoever they were, left more than blood behind. They left themselves. One night, a documentary team stayed to record overnight audio at exactly 3:13 a.m. Every camera turned off simultaneously, yet the audio recorders kept running for 7 minutes. The house was filled with overlapping whispers. Children's voices cried out. Names were spoken, and a deep, guttural breath was heard pacing from room to room. When the footage was later reviewed, one phrase repeated itself in those 7 minutes, spoken in a voice not fully human. "He never left." That audio has never been released publicly. A member of the crew later suffered a nervous breakdown, claiming he still hears the whispers every time he closes his eyes. Today, the house remains open for tours and investigations. People still go, some out of curiosity, others to chase thrills, but the truth is, they are chasing something that may already be chasing them. The walls of the Villisca house do not forget. They remember every scream, every footstep, every heartbeat that raced before it stopped. Whether the killer was a man, a demon, or something in between, no one knows. But what's certain is this: the house didn't just witness the murders, it absorbed them. And so it waits. It waits in the creak of floorboards, in the flicker of candlelight, in the soft giggle of a child that isn't there. It watches, always, not for justice, not for peace, but for someone to join the silence. Because inside the Villisca Axe murder house, history doesn't sleep, it bleeds. The death of Elisa Lam. Downtown Los Angeles is a city of endless noise and motion, but nestled among its chaos is a place that holds a silence too heavy to ignore. The Cecil Hotel, built in 1924 with the dream of grandeur, it quickly decayed into something far darker. Its walls witnessed suicides, murders, drug overdoses, and disappearances. By 2013, It was operating under a new name, trying to shed its past, but history doesn't care about new paint. That year, a 21-year-old Canadian student named Elisa Lem checked in. She was bright, curious, traveling alone, and chronicling her adventure online. Her posts were lively, filled with dreams and reflections, but something in that building, something ancient and watching, had other plans. Elisa was last seen on January 31st, when she didn't call her parents. Concern quickly turned to panic. Police searched the hotel from top to bottom. Dogs combed the premises, but she was gone, as if the building had swallowed her whole. 2 weeks passed. Then, guests began complaining about the water. It was discolored, foul-smelling, and weak in pressure. Maintenance workers climbed to the roof to inspect the water tanks. What they found shattered the city's collective sense of safety. Inside one of the tanks, naked and lifeless, floated Elisa's body. How she got there remains one of the most disturbing questions in modern true crime. The roof was locked and alarmed. The tank lids were heavy, difficult to open. She would have had to climb a ladder, lift the cover, and slip inside. There were no signs of trauma, no drugs in her system. Her clothes were found at the bottom of the tank, but the most haunting clue wasn't the body. It was the footage. The hotel elevator camera captured Elisa's final known moments. The grainy black and white video showed her entering the elevator, pressing multiple buttons, and then something changed. She peered out into the hallway, as if someone was there. She hid in the corner. She stepped in and out. Her hands moved erratically, as if she was talking to something invisible. Then she vanished. The footage went viral. Theories exploded. Some said it was mental illness. Elisa had struggled with bipolar disorder. Others believed it was something darker. The way she moved, the elevator's refusal to close, the unseen presence just beyond the frame. It all felt wrong. Paranormal investigators descended on the hotel, convinced something supernatural had taken hold of her. The Cecil wasn't new to death. It had long been a playground for the disturbed. Serial killers had lived there. Spirits were said to roam the halls. And now, a young woman, bright and brimming with life, was gone, her final moments playing like a scene from a nightmare. Some say Elisa was drawn there, that the building, like a predator, sensed her vulnerability, that it fed on her fear. In her final blog post, she had written about feeling lost between two worlds. Maybe she was. Maybe something at the Cecil found her in that in-between space and pulled her deeper. Her death was ruled accidental, but no one really believes that. Not the guests, who still hear footsteps above their rooms. Not the workers who see the elevator move on its own. And not the millions who watched her final seconds and felt, deep down, that Elisa Lam didn't just die. She was taken. After Elisa's body was discovered, the Cecil Hotel once again became a symbol of dread. News vans lined the streets. Tourists took morbid selfies at the entrance. And inside, the air turned colder. Staff began reporting strange activity. The elevator Elisa used would randomly stop on her floor. Guests in nearby rooms heard knocking on walls, 3 slow knocks, like a message. One night, a security guard said he saw her standing near the rooftop access, her back turned, motionless. When he called out, she vanished. The building had always been cursed, they said, but Elisa's death awakened something deeper. It wasn't just tragedy, it was ritual. A week after her funeral, a man reviewing old footage found something odd, a shadow present in multiple frames of the elevator video, flickering near the hallway like smoke. The footage had been watched by millions, but no one noticed it until it moved, frame by frame, It slithered toward the door as Elisa panicked just before she stepped out for the final time. It was shape without shape, form without mass. Paranormal analysts described it as a void presence, a manifestation of spiritual rot, often tied to places soaked in violence. The Cecil wasn't haunted by one ghost. It was a feeding ground for something much older. Even today, Elisa's story isn't over. In the years since her death, others have reported dreams of being in a water tank, cold and breathless, unable to scream. One woman, who never heard of Elisa, sketched the tank and the rooftop in detail during a sleep paralysis episode. Investigators dismissed it as coincidence, but those who've stepped inside the seesaw know better. The halls still feel like they're breathing. The lights still flicker when you speak her name, and the elevator, it still waits, as if expecting someone to push those buttons again. Elisa Lam became more than a victim. She became a warning, a reminder that some places are alive in the worst ways, that some buildings carry hunger, and that not all disappearances lead to peace. Some echo forever, looping in dark hallways and on grainy tapes, whispering in static. Elisa didn't just vanish. She crossed into something we weren't meant to see, and whatever it was, it saw her back. The Watcher House, in the affluent suburb of Westfield, New Jersey, nestled among quiet, tree-lined streets and million-dollar homes. A beautiful Dutch colonial stood proudly on Boulevard. It had a broad lawn, tall windows, and the kind of warmth that whispered of family barbecues and laughter echoing through hallways. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus thought they'd found their dream home, a place to raise their children, to build a life. But within days of closing, their dream began to rot. A letter arrived, handwritten, addressed simply to the new owner, and signed by someone who called themselves the Watcher. It began kindly, even congratulatory. Then it twisted. Do you know what lies within the walls of the house? Why are you here? I am watching. More letters followed. They grew darker, more detailed. The Watcher knew the names of their children, their ages, their nicknames. I see them in the windows, one letter said. I count them when they play. He or it claimed that his family had watched the house for generations, that the home was promised to him. The language was old-fashioned, eerie, but not messy. It was too calm, too controlled. The Broadduses contacted police. They installed security systems, hired private investigators, even reached out to former owners, but no one could explain it. The previous family had never received letters, or so they claimed, but some parts of their story didn't add up. And still, the letters came, always handwritten, always taunting. Fear began to infect the family's life. They never moved in. They lived elsewhere. Their dream home left empty, watched by something unseen. Maria suffered panic attacks. Derek couldn't sleep. They obsessed over the mail, over the cameras, over shadows that stretched too long on the lawn. Was it a neighbor, a deranged old man, a child playing a cruel prank? They even suspected themselves was one of them doing this subconsciously. But that paranoia, that slow unraveling, was what the Watcher wanted. In one letter, he wrote, I've been put in charge of waiting for its second coming. What was it? No one knew, but the tone suggested something ancient, something inevitable. The case spread to national news. Online detectives pored over details, but nothing fit. DNA from one envelope belonged to a woman, but didn't match Maria. Surveillance caught no one. The Watcher faded back, but the fear never did. In a final letter, after the Broadduses tried to sell the house, he wrote, You have spooked the house. You have turned it on itself. Maybe the house will punish you. It wasn't just threats anymore. It was prophecy. The home, this inanimate object, was becoming something more, a character, a presence, a living thing that had chosen sides. The Broaddus's never moved in. They sold the house in 2019 at a loss. They never discovered the identity of the watcher, and they never truly found peace. Westfield never spoke of it again. Neighbors wanted the whispers to stop. But the truth is, no one really knew who had written those letters, or why. Some think the watcher is still watching, waiting for new blood to cross the threshold. Others think the house itself was cursed, speaking through the pen of the one person who could hear it. All that remains now is silence, and the mailbox, always empty, always waiting. The watcher may have disappeared from headlines, but some believe the house is not done. In the years since, new owners have come and gone, some reporting nothing, others quietly leaving without explanation. Occasionally, a local child will mention a man with no face, watching them from the trees. A mail carrier once refused to deliver letters to the house after seeing someone crouching behind the front hedges, someone who vanished when approached. Still, nothing has ever been proven. No arrests, no names, just that house and its history of dread. Some say the watcher wasn't just a person, but a voice that came through whoever was vulnerable enough to hear it. One theory, the darkest of them all, suggests that the house creates its own caretakers, that once someone claims it, the house begins to shape them, eroding their sanity until they become the next watcher. That maybe, decades ago, the original watcher was just a man, afraid, staring too long into shadows and hearing whispers, and over time, he became something else, not possessed, but rewritten, molded by the presence buried in its walls. Perhaps that's what the Broadduses narrowly escaped, not a stalker, but transformation. Derek once said in an interview, "It felt like something was trying to get inside us, not just our lives, but our minds." That's the kind of haunting no priest can fix. A haunting by obsession, by dread, that feeds on the unknown. The watcher never needed to enter the house to destroy them. The fear was the weapon. The paranoia was the possession. That is the genius of real horror. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And so the watcher house still stands, its paint retouched, its lawn trimmed, as if nothing ever happened. But the walls know, the halls remember, and deep within its bones, something stirs when new footsteps echo through the foyer. The mailbox waits patiently, like a ritual, like a trigger, and maybe, one day, another letter will appear, its ink fresh, its words deliberate. I see you. Because some houses are not meant to be lived in, some are meant to be feared, and some are always watching.